Is the US going to fall and China take over the world? Will any smaller nations rise to power? What countries will grow and be considered global superpowers in 50 years? And what will happen to the 5 superpowers we have today? USA, China, Russia, EU, and India. One thing is certain, the world will change dramatically in your lifetime. Well, if we look back and divide our timeline in chunks of 50 years, this is what it looks like. 1975 to today. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and communism plunged globally. Germany became a unified nation again, the internet was created, climate change awareness became a thing, China went from a poor, weak country to an economic powerhouse, and AI has just begun rising. 1925 to 1975, the Great Depression hit hard, global economy went down, and the consequences were widespread unemployment and hardship. The Second World War threw the world into chaos. The UN formed, the Cold War began. 1875 to 1925. We started using electricity in the richer parts of the world. Women's right to vote. The Russian Revolution took place, replacing the Tsar with the Soviet Union. The First World War happens. 1825 to 1875. The British Empire was at its peak of power. The US was a young, weak, but evolving nation. Slavery ended. The American Civil War took place. Countries like Germany and Italy were formed. So as you can see, a lot happens in 50 years. Countries of huge influence can collapse, and as a result, countries that no one thought had a future might quickly become strong and powerful. A poor rural farmer country might become the global production center of the world. This will also be true for the coming 50 years. The power balance in this world will shift. While we can't know for sure what the future will look like, some things are more likely than others. First, let's have a quick look at the 5 superpowers we have today. What does their future look like? 1. China won't take over the world. If anything, China's power and influence will decline. China has too many internal problems. It simply cannot put its focus and resources into anything outside of itself. China's population is huge, but it's aging. An aging population means a shrinking workforce as a larger percentage becomes older, and a huge cheap workforce is what built up China in the first place. Rapid industrialization and urbanization have led to severe environmental problems. It's bad for the planet, but it's worse for China. China has a growing middle class that wants to consume more. Transitioning from a produce and export economy to a consume and innovate economy is no easy task. China is a vast country with many different people groups in it. Keeping it politically and socially stable is and will always be one of its biggest challenges. And also geographically, China's more or less impossible to defend militarily. But that's a topic for another video. In the 80s, Japan was seen as an economic superpower. Their industries devastated American businesses. One of the reasons is that in the US, loans were given based on business plans that generated profit. In Japan, loans were given based on cash flow. Meaning if you sell a lot, you can borrow a lot, build more factories, sell more, borrow more, and so on. An easy way to sell more is to lower prices, even if that means losing money and not making a profit. It's a broken system doomed to fail, and it did. Japan's economy collapsed. Why am I saying this? Because China's economy is built like that, and they have a dark future ahead of them. China will not try to take over the world. It'll be busy with their own internal struggles. Their influence and power most likely will decline in the next 50 years. 2. The USA won't go down. If anything, they've only just begun the journey as a global empire. Historically, whoever controls the seas controls the world. It was true for Athens in ancient times, for the British Empire in the 1800s, and for the United States today. Controlling the oceans means 3 things. 1. No one can attack mainland USA, as such an ambition would require transporting troops and equipment overseas. And that means you have to defeat the US Navy. And the US Navy is absolutely massive. Even if the rest of the world combined all of their naval forces, they're still not close. 2. It also means that the US can attack any country anywhere in the world anytime, and no one can stop them. 3. Roughly 80% of all transported goods in the world are transported at sea. Currently, the US Navy works as a guarantee to uphold ocean safety. But make no mistake, if they choose to, they could control global trade routes in an instant. The US economy is growing, and its population is growing. It's an economic powerhouse of epic proportions, and will remain that for a long time. Like all great empires before, the US will fall, but not within the next 50 years. 3. Russia will have major problems. They've always had these imperialistic ambitions, to be a strong and influential country. But due to growing corruption and declining population, their economy's fallen behind. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia's economy collapsed, and so they did what poor countries do. They focused on extracting raw materials instead of science and innovation. It saved their economy from ruin, but they've fallen behind the rest of world powers. They have no economic future, and they have no solution for the declining population. And they're currently in a brutally expensive war with Ukraine. which has further harmed their political influence and reputation. Russia wants to put up a facade of being a superpower, but they have enormous problems and no solutions. Their glory days are over, and in 50 years they won't be considered a superpower by anyone. A nuclear threat towards the West, but nothing more than that. 4. India. This one's simple. They have an enormous population, they have a young population, and they have a growing population. A population that will get more educated and more capable. India is a global superpower and will remain a global superpower. 5. Europe. Especially Western Europe and the European Union. For 500 years, they more or less dominated the world through colonialism, imperialism, and the Industrial Revolution. And they got so far ahead of the rest of the world that they've remained rich and powerful ever since. But they're declining, and have been for a while. Their birth rates are declining, and they have to keep up population numbers through immigration. They're still rich and well-developed, but within 50 years, they'll no longer be the center of the world. Western Europe will no longer be a global superpower. Life there will probably still be good, however, other countries will replace them as major economic and military powers globally. So what effect will these changes have on the rest of the world? And what other countries will rise to power within the next 50 years? 1. As the US will remain powerful, and it's in their interest to prevent Russia from regaining any of its former strength, NATO's Eastern Front will be fortified. This means military production, presence, and investment in Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland, the Baltics, and Romania have already seen strong economic growth and have a growing population. As Western Europe declines, Eastern Europe will rise. The power and influence countries like the UK and Germany have today, Poland will have tomorrow. 2. As Eastern Europe grows, Russia declines, and the Middle East remains somewhat unstable, one country lies in the middle of them all: Turkey. A Muslim country which already has a strong and growing influence in the Muslim world. Seeking closer relationships with Europe, they have a large and well-trained military and a geographically perfect position for trade. They're also growing in innovation, tech, and production. All in all, this is a country with a lot of things already going well for it, and everything is pointing towards an even more rapid growth. In 50 years, Turkey will have expanded from a regional power to a strong and influential player on the global arena, politically, militarily, and economically. 3. Americans buy a lot of stuff. In fact, American consumption is a major reason why China's become so productive so fast. They're selling stuff for cheap to the Americans. But with the US-China trade war going on, prices have gone up. With the Chinese middle class emerging, salaries in China go up, and so the cost of production goes up. China is also half the globe away, and shipping that far is expensive. If only there was a country with cheap labor, a young and growing population close to the US. Mexico. Mexico has all the opportunities that China once had ahead of it. And Mexico also has 2 more things that China doesn't. 1, a land border with the USA, and 2, Mexicans. And what do I mean by that? Are Mexicans somehow better than the Chinese? No. But in the US, the majority of the population in southern cities are Mexican or come from Mexican descent, many who identify as Mexican. And while China is sometimes seen as the enemy by Americans, Mexico is the beloved home country for these people. And the Mexican population in the US is growing at a rapid pace. In 50 years, the southern states will primarily be inhabited by Mexican Americans, and the attitude towards Mexico, Mexican goods, and Mexican investments will be positive. The economic and production powerhouse that China is today, Mexico will be tomorrow. So there you have it. I believe that we'll go from these superpowers to these within 50 years. What do you think? Write a comment and don't forget to subscribe.